Hi there, this is Mrs. Wright, and I'm doing a read aloud today for third through fifth grade on Epic. In light of all that's happening right now in our world, I thought it important to revisit and talk about civil rights. This is a nonfiction book, it's real. And it has a few chapters in it, but I'm just going to read the chapter, The Children's Crusade, in hopes that it might inspire you and help you relate to the current situation we're in with, I'm sure you've heard about the riots downtown and the political unrest, on top of also dealing with COVID-19. It's a lot to process, and I'm hoping this book will help you. Okay, it's called The Passing of the Civil Rights Act of 1964. We're going to read Chapter 1, The Children's Crusade. Chapter 1, The Children's Crusade. It was 1963 in Birmingham, Alabama. One by one, African American children skipped school to show up at the 17th Street Baptist Church. They ranged in age from 12 to 18 years old. They had decided it was time to take a stand. They were tired of hatred and unfair laws. Soon the group grew to nearly 1,000 African American children. Adults were absent. And this is a caption down here that say, police led a group of African American children to jail after they protested discrimination in May 1963. The children's parents feared they would lose their jobs if they protested discrimination. So protested, you've probably been hearing this word a lot lately.
Protest.
Means to declare positively, assert, or to make a protest against. So in this situation, they're making a protest against the unfair treatment. Discrimination.
Discrimination.
The treating of some people better than others without any fair or proper reason. Their children showed up at church. The group planned to march 0.5 miles to City Hall. Few made it that far. The children began a peaceful march. White police officers tried to stop the demonstration, but the children were determined. They continued on. The children wanted to end segregation.
Segregation.
The separation of isolation of a race, class, or group, as by restricted to an area by separate schools. Okay, just a reminder of what segregation was. The police arrested hundreds of children and took them to jail in school buses. They beat others with clubs or attacked them with police dogs. The protests went on for more than 1 week. And unfortunately, what's happening today what happened then is still happening today. The rest of the United States saw the events on the news. The sight of peaceful protesters began being attacked, outraged by Americans. The adults in charge of organizing the Alabama protests sat down with Birmingham officials, that President John F. Kennedy. The city agreed to allow African Americans into downtown stores. They also released the protesters from jail. The protesters began to stop marching, although it was not a complete victory. This event pushed the civil rights movement forward. Lives during the early 1960s was very different for African Americans and whites. African Americans usually lived in poorer neighborhoods. In many southern states, laws kept African Americans from using the same facilities as whites. Public areas such as grocery stores, churches, movies, schools, and restaurants had separate areas for each race. This was called segregation. Some states also outlawed marriage between different races. If African Americans broke these laws, known as the Jim Crow laws, they were beaten or killed. The laws were created to make African Americans feel like second-class citizens. Civil rights. Topeka. Luther King Jr. worked to change these laws. They scored a major Supreme Court victory. Topeka. In 1954 with the Board versus Brown of Education of Topeka. The case outlawed segregation in schools. A large problem remained, though. Who would make schools in towns in the South obey the law? Change came slowly. Advocates of civil rights felt the progress was too slow. A new president. John F. Kennedy became president in 1961. King and others hoped the new president would help their cause. 70% of African Americans voted for him. But President Kennedy worried that acting on civil rights would cause him trouble. Southern lawmakers might not support him. Neither would whites across the country who supported segregation. Civil rights voices. Martin Luther King. When you have seen hate-filled policemen curse, kick, and even kill your black brothers and sisters, you can understand our impatience. That's a quote by Martin Luther King. The Reverend Martin Luther King Jr. helped lead the civil rights movement in the United States. By using peaceful protest, he drew attention to segregation and discrimination faced by African Americans. His actions helped pass the Civil Rights Act of 1964. In 1968, he was shot and killed in Tennessee. Many of us are familiar with that piece of history. Civil rights leaders continued to protest. King called Birmingham the most segregated city in the country. Nearly 1,000 people were arrested, including Martin Luther King. President Kennedy sent in the Alabama National Guard to keep the peace. President Kennedy decided he had to do something about civil rights. In June 1963, he put together a bill that would later become the Civil Rights Act of 1964. The bill would take segregation apart piece by piece. All Americans would have equal chances to use public areas. There would be no more all-white schools. Voting would be protected. The lives of African Americans would change forever if the bill passed. This bill moved to Congress with President Kennedy's support. By then, Kennedy was assassinated in November 1906. The fate of the bill became uncertain. In 1963, President Kennedy began working on the bill that would end segregation across the United States. He gave these remarks about the proposed law. The heart of the question, whether we are going to treat our fellow Americans as we want to be treated. If an American, because his skin is dark, cannot eat lunch in a restaurant open to public, if he cannot send his children to the best public schools available, if he cannot vote for the public officials who will represent him, if, in short, he cannot enjoy the full and free life which all of us want, then who among us would be content to have the color of his skin changed and stand in his place? 100 years of delay have passed since President Lincoln freed the laws, yet the heirs, their grandsons, are not fully free. The nation, for all its hopes and all its boasts, will not be fully free until all its citizens are free. Changing minds. Imagine your support President Kennedy's upcoming bill. How would you defend his idea to help who disagree with him? Make sure you explain your opinion in facts and details that support your reasons. So that's an activity you could do if you want to. You could do a quick little Word document and send it to me. So I'm going to read that to you again. Imagine you support President Kennedy's upcoming bill. How would you defend his ideas to people who disagreed with him? Make sure you explain your opinion. Include facts and details that support your reasons. So, this is taking a walk back in history to 1960. And fast forward to 2020, and we are dealing with virtually the very same issues. So, a lot to think about, a lot to process. think it's a good idea to remind ourselves of history and the civil rights movement to help us process what's happening right now. Be well. I'm thinking of all of you.